Congressman Kevin McCarthy, M-C-C-A-R-T-H-Y. First of all, thank you all for joining me today. You know, during the campaign to become the congressman for the 20th district, especially after redistricting with the new lines, I made a promise that we would open an office in Clovis. This district goes from Clovis down to Bakersfield, with the largest population being in Clovis and Bakersfield. So I'm very proud to say it's another promise being kept, that our office is up and running in Clovis. I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish even this short amount of time. Lots of times people could put how people vote aside, but what people really need, regardless of where they stand, is when they need to interact with government, have a problem with the IRS, have a problem with a passport and others. We've been able to almost do 200 cases out of this area up here with Clovis, almost have them all closed now. So the one thing I've always wanted to pride myself on is constituent services. Regardless of where you are, if you live in this district, we want to represent you. We want to be your voice and make sure you have an ability to solve any federal problems, and that's what we continue to work on. Inside Congress, we are now in what is called the August recess back in the district. I come back almost every weekend, but we've been in office now in the new majority for more than 200 days. And so when you measure that, these first 200 days versus the last Congress. In the last Congress, Democrats did have the majority. It was under Speaker Pelosi. The Democrats also controlled the Senate and they controlled the presidency. But if you look at the number of bills passed, especially when it comes to policy, more bills have passed in this Congress than the Congress before. More bills have become law, which people would think that's pretty difficult because Republicans have a 5-seat majority just to pass something. But to get that bill passed through the Senate and then signed by the president, yes. More have been done now, more productive, more accountability. And one thing that we've always promised running for office in the last year is a commitment to America. We've been able to pass the Parents' Bill of Rights. We've been able to pass H.R. 1, which is energy independence for America, that we can lower the price of energy and create more economic ability in America. We were able to pass a bill to secure our border. We were able to deal with the debt ceiling for the first time, actually cut spending in Washington, produce at the same time work requirements, help people lift them out of poverty, be able to cut back on those IRS agents that the president wanted to go and pass and audit every individual. So there's a lot of successes along the way. There's a lot more work to be done. Right before we left in the appropriate process, a work that Congress needs to do every year, but they haven't been doing. We know before I came in, they were doing these omnibuses, meaning putting all these bills in the last days of Congress, right before Christmas, a few people writing, nobody able to read them. We changed all that. We're now doing our work. We passed our first appropriation bills. One of the first things I did when I took office was to open the Capitol back up for the people. It is the people's house. I'm proud of the fact. I changed the rules where members of Congress now have to go to work, that bills have to go through committee. And also a number of items that I wanted to change to make sure that these bills weren't passed thousands of pages and nobody can read them. Now we hold it and give 72 hours, not just for members to read it, for America to read the bills as well. It's just a new way of doing business in a new Washington to reflect what the people across America has told us, and will continue to fight to represent you. So that's what I'm just here listening as I met with a lot of community leaders throughout the day, throughout Clovis, ways that I could better represent this region in this area. And that's what I'm out doing today. So let's open it up and take some questions.
So who did you have today visiting you? I mean, we saw local dignitaries.
You had some local dignitaries. Before we had people within community leaders when it came to veterans, when it came to law enforcement, came to mayor. I try to get from community planning and others. I try to look at ways that I could be more helpful interaction, be it infrastructure, from mental health, from dealing with veterans and others. So it's an opportunity to meet with more people here, get more questions to be answered, but also updates on from city manager and others.
Congressman, I want to get your reaction to a major story in the area this week about these labs discovered in Reedley and the connection to China. Does that concern you? And have you been talking to the likes of the governor's office and the attorney general's office to see what kind of investigation is going on?
This is very disturbing. I met with a number of leaders here from county to city and others about this. What can be real concerning is what was going on in that lab, what was not being reported in that lab. The funding of that lab is, I know the FBI is involved now as well. One of the first things I did becoming speaker was to create a select committee on China. I want to make sure it's bipartisan. I think one of the biggest things that we have failed at through the years is we have not spoken with one voice. When you look at what's going on in our own soil, what's going on in our own background here is a lab that is studying, doing things that they did not have jurisdiction or policy or rights to. But if it wasn't for code enforcement or a fire, we would have never known about it. They were selling test kits that weren't right. They were doing research that wasn't allowed. My concern is to get to the bottom of what happened here, but also look as where is this happening other parts of this country as well. And I'm going to take this back to the Select Committee on China in dealing with it as well and working with the FBI.
Are you aware of these labs popping up? Are they a problem? Are you aware of other labs like this?
There's more than just this, and it's more than just labs from what China has been doing in America. On our college campuses, on the spying, on the stealing of our technology. We've watched spies build relationships with members of Congress. With Swalwell, we've watched Chinese, the driver for a decade for Feinstein was a Chinese spy as well. But to have a lab in this neighborhood, to be studying, we all know where COVID came from and the other damage could be done with the modification of mice in there. Why were they doing that? The code specs of how they were studying these different diseases that could be transmitted out into the area were very concerning, but going beyond what the scope they're allowed to. Now we're finding out that the governor of California provided him with $360,000 in this process too, and wanting to move. So there's a lot of more questions that need to be answered, and I'm going to follow up with the FBI to make sure we can find not only what happened here, but if it's happening anywhere else.
Mr. Speaker, what is your level of concern when it comes to mainly, there's rumors that it could be Chinese nationalists. There's also rumors that they're infiltrating the Central Valley. As being part of this district now, what will you do personally to get to the bottom of it?
This is a great question. This is something I've been worried about for quite some time, not just for the Central Valley, but for America itself. I've watched what the Chinese have done just throughout the years. That's why I created the Select Committee on China. And I went to Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader before I was even Speaker, telling him what I wanted to do. I tried to create this under Speaker Pelosi. And I got the entire idea of why to do this with walking the grave sites of Normandy on the 75th anniversary. Because I thought as a policymaker, what could people in my position have done that that day never would have taken place? And it's not a week or month before it comes to a situation as that. It's the decades before. And I've watched the avenues of China come in and steal our technology, not just when you think militarily, but our advancements when it comes to agriculture, going on to our college campuses, into many of our businesses at the same time. And when I tried to work with then Speaker Pelosi to get it done, it took me 8 months, and she finally said yes. But we brought the Washington Post in to interview the members. The night before we were going to announce it, she stopped it and said no. So now was an opportunity to do something different. If you watch how we built the Select Committee on China, I selected members from all different committees, from E&C, from agriculture, from Ways and Means. Why? Because this is exactly what the Chinese are doing. They can make America vulnerable from getting into our pipelines, getting into what are they purchasing, would it be our food supply. It's a great concern to me. And now we're finding just another evidence of it when it becomes to a lab. We don't have all the answers of what was happening in this lab. Could they have created something? We've watched the damage that COVID had done to the world. One of the first things I did within becoming Speaker too is create the Select Committee about COVID so we get the answers. Why did China shut down domestic flights but allow international flights to go with Wuhan? Why did they go after the WHO to say it didn't come from China? Why did we find now that even the American government had funded some of this research? Is some of this research being done here in America? These are all questions that need to be answered. So between those two committees personally is where we're going to look at this, but also work with the FBI on a personal level to make sure the valley that this isn't happening again. But gather the information and the knowledge we get here to see, because the one thing I've found that China does is they never do something one time. They duplicate it across the country. And those are the things we'll be looking at.
Mr. Speaker, another big story for our area has been Tulare Lake and the
Yes.
emergence of it. Have you had a chance to go out there, and what do you think should be done about Tulare Lake? There's certainly some who'd like to keep it there, and there are many who want it drained to get back to agricultural use.
Well, it's there because we had a very wet season. It's also there now because for the decades before, we had not built to be able to gather all the water in a wet season. Think about all the water we lost going out to the ocean. Think about the billions of dollars it would cost to create a desalination plant to make salt water, fresh water, but we sent all this fresh water out. We need to plan for the future of California. I know now a lot of people are leaving California, but we still don't have enough water for the people here today, but we want to plan for our children for the future. So one of the things we have done many times before is pass legislation to build more storage. So you wouldn't have a lake where it wasn't designed to be. I know it was there before. We want to make sure we don't have the flooding. It's not growing more. I've toured a couple times by air as well with Congressman David Valadao. This is in his district. So we want to be able to store as much water as we can, but I think agriculture is the greatest use of that land there, and we'd like to get it back to agricultural property. But it's going to take a number of months, probably more than a year, before that drains
Yeah,
away.
because obviously the water that's there, that whole area is kind of contaminated now because of the way the water went in, and
Yeah.
there's just all that
It's the worst way,
trash and-
yeah. So this is environmental damage that happens as well. But this is a real question for the governor. When we passed the WIN Act, which was bipartisan, David Valadao, myself, and Senator Feinstein, why did the governor fight us? Why did he put up more roadblocks so we couldn't have more storage? The greatest return on the investment would be just lifting Lake Shasta by a few feet. You can store so much more. But why would he fight those days? So now we end up with where we are in life. Why couldn't we have been prepared for this wet year so when the dry years come again, we wouldn't have the problems? That is mismanagement, especially when it comes to Governor Newsom on how he has managed California's infrastructure. We're living off infrastructure that was built in the 60s. We're now 2023. We need to be planning for 2050. And all he's done is fight it. And we've watched the environmental challenges because of what he's done, and we've watched the poor decisions that he's done, even though the federal government was able to come together with Republicans and Democrats alike and pass a bill that would help us have more water storage, something that we've been fighting in Congress for quite some time for.
Mr. Speaker, can I get a reaction as far as the special counsel's indictment of President Trump here in court today? Your thoughts on the indictment and the charges leveled against the former president?
Well, look, I didn't see what happened today. I've been in meetings all day, but the one thing I do know is it really begins to feel like it's a two-justice system. I mean, I've watched Hunter Biden and what the federal government tried to give him pretty much immunity till a judge said no. I've listened now where we just had Hunter Biden's partner our business partner come in, where the president had told America that he's never talked to his son about the business dealings, that his family has never gotten $1 from China. We've now found that they created 20 shell companies when he was vice president. We've now found that the business partner says the vice president called in 20 times. We now found that the vice president went to dinner. A little pay to play. Hunter Biden got a brand new Porsche, $142,000 car. Hunter Biden got millions of dollars after the one dinner with the oligarch from Moscow. So it seems a little pay to play. And then when the IRS, which I've dealt with many cases with the IRS for our constituents, I've never known them to let the statute of limitations run out, especially when you're supposed to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars you did not disclose beforehand. But that's what they want to do to the Biden family. It just seems to me, if you're part of Biden Inc., you got to pay to play, and now you got a federal government that lets you off on it, and everybody else gets treated differently. I just think that's wrong.
Look, you were in the building on January 6th,
Yeah.
when everything went down, and the president's kind of, he didn't really dissuade anybody from going down to the Capitol, and as we saw, it wasn't a bunch of tourists enjoying a, January afternoon. I mean, you were there, you saw, I would imagine you were a little bit worried at times. I mean,
Yeah, I think
there's a correlation there.
there's a correlation there, but what's interesting to me is after January 6th and the investigation that came forth, we found a lot of problems. We found that the Capitol Police were not supplied properly. We found that the warnings ahead of time from the bombs being dropped and the FBI is getting warned, they never told the Capitol Police. We found that the riot gear for the Capitol Police were locked in buses down below. We also found that the speaker at the time, and maybe the mayor, didn't allow the National Guard to be up there. So there were a lot of mistakes along that way that day. And what we found with the report, even from on the Senate side, a bipartisan one, the failure of the leadership of the Sergeant of Arms under the direction of Speaker Pelosi. I was minority leader that day. Do you know how many times the Sergeant of Arms ever met with me, or even called me that day, or even after he was fired? 0. The one thing I've tried to do as being Speaker, anytime it comes to a security position, the police run it, the decision, not a political decision. When I'm going to get briefed about a threat, I call the minority leader in to get the exact same briefing I'm getting together. It shouldn't be a political place. And unfortunately, the old Washington was. The good thing is, this new Washington is not. I'm going to continue to fight for the American people, that it's the people's house, and at the same time, people are going to be protected.
Mr.
So,
Speaker,
yes.
would you support the pardoning of those who've been convicted of January 6 crimes?
I don't have the power to pardon, so I don't know.
Last question.
You were asked about the Trump arraignment today, but you went right to Hunter Biden. So the question is, do you see those cases in the justice system as equivalent?
Okay, to be fair, I was asked about that, but what was my first answer? I didn't get to see what happened today because I've been meeting. So your first response back to me isn't true. So I answered the question he asked me, and I stand by my answer.
Do
Yes.
you think Trump will be acquitted, full stop, on all charges of the 3 indictments?
From what I see now, they seem totally political. What's interesting to me, why didn't Garland, he seemed like he was going to do nothing about this for the first 2 years. It seems as though every time Trump goes higher in the poll, he gets a new indictment. It seems to me, after you learn of the real dealings behind the Bidens, the next day he gets indicted. Anytime there is new information, the federal government just seems to have a 2-tier system. And look, I have the honor and the privilege to serve in Congress. The building itself sits directly across from the Supreme Court. There's Lady Justice there. She has a scale and she has a blindfold on. That's the way justice in America is supposed to play, that it's fair and even. Right now, I think most people in America will say, it doesn't seem quite fair, and it doesn't seem quite even, especially if somebody is your political opponent. Think for a moment before the business partner of the Bidens was supposed to come and testify, where he had waited all these times not. How many times have you seen the Department of Justice to take action on a Saturday? They took action on a Saturday trying to get the business partner to go into jail before he could come to testify before the House. It wasn't us until we raised the issue. Think for a moment to anyone that you have known. Would they get a deal with the federal government to serve no time? And when you go before the judge and then the judge asks the question, could any new charges be raised? The federal government says, no, we could raise more charges. But when you look at what was written, they were giving him a really nice deal, something that most Americans would never receive. It wasn't until that was actually raised to the American public that they can see that justice seemed like it became a little fairer. And I think that's all what Americans want. Look, I'm not on the jury, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know what's going to happen. But the one thing as a policymaker I do know, I'm going to fight to make sure it's fair for all Americans. It shouldn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and it definitely should not matter in America if you're my political opponent that I can use government against you. That is wrong.
Well, we can rewind that to, Donald Trump still saying the election in 2020 was fraud. There was fraudulent activity going on.
Yeah.
That Joe Biden didn't win.
Yeah. And I could say the same thing that Hillary Clinton says about her election that she lost. I can say the same thing about the DNC who said it about the 2016 race. I can say the same thing about those in the Democratic Party from the leadership on down about George Bush not winning, that Al Gore did. But were any of them prosecuted? Were any of them put in jail? Were any of them held with no response to be able to get out? The answer is no. So yeah, you can raise that someone raised a question. And in America, you are entitled to raise a question. You're entitled to question whether it was honest or not. That's the uniqueness of the First Amendment. That's the uniqueness of America. But you know what? You shouldn't be prosecuted for your thoughts. And the difference here is when Hillary Clinton said it, nothing happened to her. When they said it in Georgia's election, nothing happened to them either. You know what? When the DNC said it, nothing happened to them either. So stop using government to go after people who politically disagree with you. That is wrong, and that should stop now.
There are many in your party who'd like to see President Biden impeached. Can you tell us where you stand on that?
Well, the one thing I know is I will not do what the Democrats did. I will not use impeachment for political purposes. We all know now the Russia collusion was wrong. Has that not been proven? Even from, you found the FBI doing the research. The Justice Department came back. We now found what Adam Schiff said was a total lie. We now watch that they use it purely for political basis. So we should never do that. So the one thing I know is I will never will. But the one thing about Congress, we have the right to have oversight. That means Republicans and Democrats alike. And if you watch what we've been able to do, you have an individual, an informant that the FBI still pays to this day. We just found out, even though it's been years ago, that the informant came forward and had an allegation that Biden was bribed as a vice president. But what was done with that document? Nothing. But when the Justice Department found out under Bill Barr, he sent it to Pennsylvania. The Justice Department literally said there's more to the story. When have attorneys out investigated the FBI? When the IRS was investigating Hunter Biden, were they ever told about this document? No. Then when they found out about it, they asked to be able to use it? They did not. So that's a question. We have jurisdiction over the FBI, so we should see it. We had to subpoena to even get it. Then we have a president who said he's never had any dealings in his son's business. It's not just his son's business, it's not his family. In this allegation, they said they bribed the vice president, but you'll never find it because he did a lot of shell companies. We've now found from suspicious activities, which I assume nobody in here has ever gotten one in their banking, but we found the Biden family has had almost 200 of them, that they created 20 shell companies that they never told us about as VP, that the Biden family got 16 of the 17 payments from Romania while he was vice president. We now know the president has now backtracked that yes, China did pay his family, that yes, he did get on phone calls. So my place is, we need to, as a member of Congress on any side of the aisle, here's a question, here's an allegation, here's one thing that we found a lie. Now we've had IRS whistleblowers come forth and say they were treated differently. We've now found out that Weiss said he wanted a special counsel. The Attorney General said he'd give it to him but denied. He said they wanted to prosecute in 2 different districts. The Attorney General said if they want to prosecute, they can, and he's saying in a meeting they can't. The individuals actually took notes of the meeting, sent them out to everybody. So now we've now found somebody is lying in this. The responsibility of the House is to investigate and find out who's lying. Now, if somewhere along the way someone has broken the law, that it has risen to an impeachment level, constitutionally you would have to follow through. But I never pick and choose about something like as serious as that for some political basis. I do know the constitutional responsibilities of the House is for oversight and investigation. That's what we're doing.
But are you trying
At the
to
same time, policy.
Are you trying to speed up some of those answers that raising questions to before the 2024 election?
No, I don't play anything based upon an election. The only thing that gets sped up is when an IRS agent, which we didn't go out and look, come for us and give us this information. Or now that you have the business partner come forward and contradict exactly what the president has said. So we just follow it wherever the information takes us. That's all we're doing. I appreciate the time with you. I thank you for coming out. Please take a look at the office. You're always welcome here, and my numbers are always around. If there's anything I can help you with, I appreciate it greatly. Thank you.